Some years ago, I took one of my boys on a water slide. It was shaped like the letter U, so it was an almost vertical drop that then led into an almost vertical climb. And so you alternated between going feet first towards the trough and then feet first towards the sky and then backwards into the trough. And each time you lost a little bit of speed and therefore had a slightly less extreme drop. As you can imagine, there were various instructions that we were given beforehand, but having been given all of these, just before we launched off into oblivion, the lifeguard said, "Keep your chin tucked in." It was one of those things that was counterintuitive. Everything in you wants to lean back, but when you're on a rubber tire, leaning back increases the chances of you flipping out of it. How does this relate to prayer? Great question. Jesus' disciples asked him to teach them how to pray, and he gave them the Lord's Prayer as a series of directions for them to follow in prayer. And then having done that, Jesus gives them two illustrations by way of final instructions. So we can assume that these final instructions are important to our success, just like the direction to keep your chin tucked in on the water slide. I want to unpack the first illustration that Jesus gave today. Jesus says, imagine having visitors turn up to your home really late one night. They haven't had anything to eat, and it's really embarrassing because you haven't done the weekly shop, so you have nothing to give them. All the shops are closed because it's so late. What are you going to do? In Jesus' culture, hospitality was really important, and in that culture it was a communal responsibility. If someone visited your street and had a bad experience, it reflected badly on everyone who lived on that street. So knowing this, you go to the neighbours. They have a vested interest in your guests being well treated. You ring the doorbell again and again and again. Remember, it's past midnight, and eventually a light comes on and a window's thrown open, and a rather annoyed neighbour leans out and asks, "What do you want at this hour?" When they find out that it's because you have guests and have nothing in your fridge or the store cupboard to serve them, they're not impressed. And they probably tell you that with a few choice words, and the window is slammed and the lights go off. But hospitality is important. It's a matter of honour. So you keep on ringing the doorbell. And eventually, not because it's the neighbourly thing to do, not because it's the kind thing to do, not because it's the right thing to do, your neighbour gives up. They come to the door, and to just get rid of you, they appear on the doorstep with a handful of food. And using this story, Jesus encourages us to be persistent when we pray. What an unusual way to do that. Be like an annoying neighbour who just will not give up. Well, sometimes praying does feel like ringing God's doorbell over and over. So does this mean that God is asleep or that he has to be driven to the point of exasperation before responding to us? No. And that's the point that Jesus is making. His point is that persistence can get an answer out of people, and it can make people do the right thing when they wouldn't normally care. When you keep on ringing customer services, eventually they do the right thing just to get rid of you. This story isn't about what God is like. It's about what we're like. And Jesus' point is that we don't ask. And when we do ask, we're sometimes not bold enough in our asking. Sometimes in life we go without or we struggle and we forget that God is our Father and we don't realize that he's close to us. And so we live alone and in lack when the Almighty One, the Limitless One, is right beside us. And sometimes when we pray, we do so with such little confidence that we're like someone who rings a doorbell once and then leaves. We're too quick to assume that God hasn't heard us or that he doesn't care, and we leave without a response. Jesus' point is that answered prayer is a matter of honour, God's honour. We're God's children, and it doesn't look good on any parent when their children are neglected. Our well-being reflects on God, and we shouldn't try to manipulate him in this, but we should expect his help, his care, his provision, and his intervention. We should ask boldly. We shouldn't be afraid to be persistent or to knock expectantly on God's door. And our Father who is good, who's always alert, who's eager to help, will respond to us. Don't be like someone who has help next door, help that loves you and wants you to succeed, help that is honor bound to respond, but help that you never call on. Don't think that God will be slow or hard to get help from. Ask and keep on asking for all of your needs. Knock and knock every time you're in trouble. Expect and expect every time that God will be there for you, ready and willing, eager to help.